we did a big day of action aimed at the banks that fund the fossil fuel industry. We're too old to comfortably sprawl on the sidewalk for 4 hours at a time. So we went to every Goodwill store in the metro area and bought every rocking chair that they had. And that's what we used to shut down the banks for the afternoon. The Times the next day was calling it the Rocking Chair Rebellion. So there's a good working definition of both old and bold.
You are unlawfully blocking the entrance to this building and obstructing pedestrian traffic.
We engage in civil disobedience like the Rocking Chair Rebellion, but it's not the only thing we do, and we don't require that people do it.
1/3 of Pakistan underwater in 2023.
So I've spent my life as a volunteer building movements to help work particularly on climate change. But I began to worry that I was hearing too many people say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve this problem. That seemed both unfair to me and unrealistic. They need the backup of people with a lot of structural power. And if you've reached the age when you have hair coming out your ears, then you have structural power coming out your ears too. We have this skewed sense that when you retire from whatever it was you did in order to make money in your life, that your productive capacity is pretty much over. But in fact, your productive capacity is now much higher than it's ever been before, because you can actually work on things that truly matter to you and to the world.
In this moment, you are fighting for humanity.
We're so hopeful that Citibank will start figuring out that what they're doing is just vandalizing the earth.
And I talked to somebody who is in a retirement community, and they lost their spouse and just feel that there's no meaning to their life. And then suddenly they discover Third Act and are taking place in a protest. And then they announce that they've suddenly found new meaning in their life. And boy, if that doesn't just tear at your heartstrings.
People also have a real hunger to make a difference in the world. And I think that hunger is maybe strongest of all towards the end of your life. Until that point, legacy has been an abstract thing. Legacy is the world you leave behind for the people you love the most.
One of her poems up on the ice shelf that when it melted would drown. Change on the planet happening in sea ice in the summer Arctic in my lifetime.
Very nice that they have, programs for people to paint watercolors and do aerobics in the pool. But
You want to go out right. And it's the first time they've ever done it.
we have a lifetime of networks and connections and resources and skills that we can bring to bear.
This isn't a time to retire from the field, that it's a time to be more active. Third act is my main activism outlet. And I try to balance that with picking up my grandkids every day from school and spending time with them. It's a whole set of different tactics that are more elder friendly, but also elder impactful.
Theoretically, we've learned something in the course of 7 or 8 decades on the planet. We don't have to be at the front of this parade and shouldn't be, but we do have a very, very particular role to play in helping rouse the consciousness and the conscience of societies because of our age. I was last night at speaking at a retirement community in suburban Boston. They would look at some young person and say, "Oh, you give me hope." Um, we've got a few years to deal with this crisis. That's what the scientists tell us. And so, if we're going to do it effectively, we cannot wait for college students to grow up and become prime ministers or whatever. We're at about 100,000 people now on the list, and working groups in most states, and getting an immense amount done.
You don't want to just do any kind of trouble, but in fact, you want to do it for a cause.
One of the things that older people have to bring here, and it's a really important commodity, is time. If you recruit a 63-year-old to go be part of something like Third Act, there's a reasonable chance they're going to be doing it for another quarter century. One of the things that society has is a lot of stereotypes about old people, just like they have a lot of stereotypes about young people, and most of them aren't really. People of our age had the great good luck to be young at a time when it seemed very possible to change the world in profound ways. And I think we've kept that sense through our lives. One of the things we've done a lot of and that we really enjoy is working closely with youth activists of all kinds. I think the sense among young people is often that they've been abandoned to deal with these issues, that old people took the cream off the top and left behind a world that wasn't working very well and don't want to have anything to do to repair it. And and we're in grave danger, as everybody now understands, of being the first generations that leave the world a much worse place than we found it. Um, and nobody wants that.
Bill McKibben is an environmentalist and founder of Third Act, an organization that encourages people over 60 to take action on climate change. Tonight, McKibben shares his brief but spectacular take on working together on climate action.
I went to Greenland because I wanted to take a young poet from the Marshall Islands, a woman named Kathy Jetnil Kajiner. I wanted her reciting one of her poems up on the ice shelf that, when it melted, would drown the country that she'd been born on. And while we were hovering around in a helicopter on the way home, a 20-story high chunk of this ice shelf just broke off and fell into the ocean. I was, dangling out the side of the helicopter with my stupid cell phone, just trying somehow to capture some sense of what this was like. On the one hand, it's dreadful because you know what it means. The sea has just risen another fraction of a millimeter and somebody's life has been made much harder. But it's also a reminder of what an insanely beautiful planet we were born onto. Even as you look on in a certain kind of horror, you also look on in a certain kind of awe. We're used to thinking of change on the planet happening in geologic time, that it takes a very long time for glaciers to move or oceans to shift. Right now, it's happening very much in real time. Everybody's seen those pictures that came back from the first Apollo missions out to space in the 1960s. Those pictures are as out of date as my high school yearbook picture. We've melted half the sea ice in the summer Arctic in my lifetime. In 1970, there were 70% more wild animals wandering around this earth than there are now. It must be said, kids are doing extraordinary work organizing around climate change. But there is something a little undignified about taking the biggest problem that the world's ever gotten into and asking junior high school students to solve it for you. Third Act is a new organization designed to get people over the age of 60 working to defend our climate and to defend our democracy. We started organizing Third Act because we started to understand how much power those of us over the age of 60 possess. A, there's a lot of us, 70 million people over the age of 60. B, we punch way above our numbers politically because we all vote. And C, fair or not, we ended up with most of the money. Baby boomers and the silent generation have about 70% of America's financial assets. So if you wanted to move Washington or you wanted to move Wall Street, it helps to have some people with hairlines like mine engaged in this work. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s, your first act was in that period of rapid social, cultural, political transformation of the 60s and 70s. Our second act was a little more about consumerism than it was about citizenship. That's water under the bridge. Now people emerge in their third act with skills, resources, with time, which they may not have had before, and with kids or grandkids. I mean, your legacy is the planet you leave behind for the people you love the most. And the planet we're going to leave behind and the democracy we're going to leave behind at the moment seem likely to be much shabbier than the ones we were born into. Most older people realize that, and that there's real meaning in continuing to try the project of building a better society. My name is Bill McKibben, and this is my brief but spectacular take on working together.
And you can watch more brief but spectacular videos online at pbs.org/newshour/brief.
Pedestrian traffic. You are ordered to disperse now to permit the safe flow of pedestrian traffic. If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you refuse to disperse, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. This is the New York City Police Department. You are unlawfully blocking the entrance to this building and obstructing pedestrian traffic. Disorderly conduct. This is the New York City Police Department. You are unlawfully blocking the entrance to this building and obstructing pedestrian traffic. You are ordered to disperse now to permit the safe flow of pedestrian traffic. If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you refuse to disperse, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. Since you have refused to disperse, you will be placed under arrest on the charge of disorderly conduct. If you do not cooperate and accompany the arresting officer to the prisoner transport vehicle, or if you resist arrest, you may be charged with additional crime.
Square miles of Canada forest burned in 2023. 1/3 of all species extinct by 2050.
1/3 of Pakistan underwater in 2023.
Over 10,000 people in the U.S. die from heat yearly. Can you hear the earth? She's crying. Can you hear the earth? She's dying.
Citibank, this building behind us, has poured more money into the fossil fuel industry than just about any institution on earth. They're trying to make a profit at the end of the world, and they need to stop it.
Grandmothers, grandfathers, you understand that at this moment you are fighting for humanity.
We're so hopeful that Citibank will start figuring out that what they're doing is just vandalizing the earth.
That has to stop. We're putting our bodies where our hearts and minds are.
We didn't know if this would work because the political scientists tell us that people become more conservative as they age. But I had my doubts about that. If you're in your third act now, your first act was in that period of great social and cultural and economic and political transformation of the 1960s and the 1970s. And that generational DNA, I think, is still very much in place. And I think that's why third act has grown so quickly. We're quite understanding that we're old.
As I recruit and work with other senior citizens, elders, that some were not activists in their youth, but are learning how to do it and are finding that it's giving them new meaning.
Yeah.
And others have been active all their lives and they're setting good examples too. We created the problem during my generation and we didn't fix it during my second act. You want to do something that lifts up other people and ultimately makes the world a better place. You should act up and act out, but do so in a respectful way, but also an impactful way. And that's what third act focuses on.
Every week around America, there are people from third act now attending the meetings of the public utility commissions and public service commissions. These are truly important bodies that have been protected for decades by a force field of boringness. They meet on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and the only people who ever came were utility lobbyists and so on. And now we've trained up people everywhere to go and sit there and listen while they crochet or do a crossword puzzle or whatever it is, and then to intervene, to be effective parts of the movement to make sure that these guys are not captured by the utility, but representing the public interest. We have people working on and winning state legislative battles in place after place after place. We have people who are truly effective electoral campaigners out knocking doors and manning phone banks and on and on and on. It's a really remarkable cohort of people who get amazing amount done. But I do not find uh, uh, a crippling level of cynicism among people in third act. Cynicism, almost nihilism, is something that's making life very hard for younger people. In a working culture, elders have a role to play, a serious role to play. And, traditionally, that's a good thing to be able to share with everyone else.
He identified that exporting liquefied natural gas was a disaster for the planet, was going to double the emissions of Europe. And this is something that we needed to stop. And we were going to use as a pressure point the Department of Energy. And so we organized elders all around the country to not only write letters there, but also agree to show up and block the entrance and get arrested if necessary at the Department of Energy on a set date. And before that date ever arrived, the Department of Energy and the Biden administration announced that they were putting a pause on issuing new permits. That's a joyful day.
We've definitely had a bunch of centenarians. One of our very first people who really stepped forward and made videos and gave talks and things was Norman Lear. Died last year at the age of 100. Absolutely as committed to, building the kind of America he wanted at age 100 as he, risked his life to do at age 19. I started something called 350.org, which was the first big global grassroots climate campaign. We've organized 20,000 demonstrations in every country except North Korea. And a lot of that work was done with young people, and young people are really at the forefront of a lot of this drive. If they really wanted to sort of salt the wound, Um, um,
So that's what this is.
you were around for the apex of the civil rights movement and the moment when we started taking women seriously in public life, and for the first Earth Day when 20 million Americans poured into the streets to demand action. There's a lot of muscle memory about how to make change and why we need to make change.
So one of your third act's motto is "old and bold." At least that's on some of your merchandise.
Yes.
What does "old and bold" mean to you?
Well, I mean, we had we're um, we did a big day of action. I'll give you an example. Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry in the world. And we had 100 demonstrations in 100 cities. I was in DC for what I think was the biggest of them. We had several thousand people out in the streets, and we wanted to shut down the banks for the day to make our point. But
All right. So Bruce, you showed us "old and bold" on your phone. I think as perhaps that's your screensaver. What does that mean to you?
Well, just that and I'm just surprised that but it's not a time to be complacent. It's not a time, as Bill says, to leave it to the youth to solve this problem. And I'm not prepared to retire from the field, but want to keep working on it so that we've got as much cross-generational intersectionality going as possible.
So how did you get involved, Bruce? Actually, sorry, Bruce, if you could answer two questions at once. Can you tell us your name, your age, and how you got involved in Third Act?
All right. So it's Bruce Hamilton. I'm 73 now. I've had a lifetime of activism. When Bill describes being active in the 60s, that was me, working on the draft, working on civil rights, and then experiencing Earth Day and deciding I wanted to shift my attention to environmental advocacy. Started out with an environmental advocacy journal called High Country News. My wife and I were the editors of it, which fought coal development and strip mining in the Northern Plains. But then I shifted over to the Sierra Club, at first being an organizer against strip mining and coal-fired power plants. But ultimately, I moved to the national office in California. Before I was in Wyoming for 10 years doing this work. And in California, became a manager activist. So I developed the entire field program for the Sierra Club and ultimately became the conservation director, communications director, national policy director, deputy executive director, just had lots of different roles over 45 years. But when I turned 70, I decided it was time to hand over the reins. I just thought it was important to bring up new leadership and new ideas, and that would be better for the organization to have some new people and new perspectives. But I wasn't about to retire from the field. So I didn't want to take up space and keep staying on the staff or even running for the board of directors because I thought they needed to have a fresh look at things. And right at that same time, Bill had started up Third Act, and it seemed like just the right thing. So within a month of him starting it up and me learning about it, I called up and said, "How can I help?" And they put me to work. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. It's my main outlet. I still volunteer with the Sierra Club on a political committee and some renewable siting work. There's a lot of different groups active in some just at the Berkeley community level where I live. But, you know, because I'm doing it for them more than I'm doing it for me.
Yeah. So I saw in your bio that you like to make quote unquote good trouble. Tell us what that means.
Well, it comes from John Lewis, who started making good trouble at a very young age when he was with SNCC and working, got his head bashed in on the Selma Bridge. But, he basically would talk about how but you aren't necessarily going to do that always just being within the boundaries that people set for how you ought to act. So when necessary, so, you know, so on that same first day of action that Bill described, we had a similar measure that was out here in California, shutting down the headquarters of Wells Fargo. And there were some people that were chaining themselves to the door. There were some younger people that were rappelling off the front of the bank that I wasn't about to do. And then there were a bunch of us that were in the streets that were blocking off traffic and making noise and backing them up. And we shut down the world headquarters of Wells Fargo for a day.
And so,
That's good trouble.
yeah. I'm curious, did people get arrested at that time?
Yeah. But the police in San Francisco were pretty understanding. And Wells Fargo had basically decided they were just going to shut down the bank rather than confront us, partially because it was San Francisco and the police were not going to come in with billy clubs and drag away people. So there were people chained to the front doors and there were people hanging from their rappel lines on the front of the bank for as long as we wanted. It was actually a time when there was a big rainstorm, so it wasn't that comfortable to keep doing it. So finally it dispersed on its own.
But
So
people, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of third actors arrested this summer outside Citibank in New York over this long summer of heat protest that we were a big part of. But you know what? Bruce is right. This is a tiny part of the work that we do. In state after state after state. So there's every kind of action. Um, and and I, you know, uh, and and time in many ways. I mean, they have time during the day to do things, but also one of the things you realize when you're organizing with young people is young people don't stay young that long, you know. You get out of college and then you're off working and doing whatever you got to do and stuff.
So I read. I think Bill. You must have been on Science Friday recently, and I read a quote from some of the comments. One of your volunteers who described the people at Third Act as the strongest, most sincere, kind, funny, hardworking, forgiving, and worried people I've ever met. What do you think of? Love your reaction to that quote.
That seems very fair to me. You know, whatever else. And true, most of those stereotypes, but we are formed by the generations in which we grew up, I think. And one thing I don't find among, and I'll be interested to see what Bruce thinks, but and I think for understandable reasons, a kind of in lots of ways right now. I completely get it and I understand why it is. And I'm committed to try and, you know, change things so it's not so overpowering for younger people. And I think that they've often been relieved to, so I think it's really, I remember the very first sort of big demonstration we did at Third Act was at the behest of and in cooperation with a bunch of young people from Greta Thunberg's Fridays for the Future movement. And they wanted to take on these banks too. But I talked to a young person, we don't even have checking accounts, you know, we don't have credit cards. They're not going to listen to us. Will you come help? So we said, sure. And I remember the demonstration outside a big Chase branch in Boston, and there were 200 or 300 high school kids there because there's all, you know, high school kids really understand the barrel of the gun down which they are staring, you know. And they're sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a bunch of us from this nascent Third Act with a banner that said fossils against fossil fuels, you know. And uh, I think for the young people there, it was like they were relieved and happy to see us there, and also relieved and happy to see that we're not overcome with our own self-importance either in the course of doing all this.
Yeah.
I would add that one of the things that I find very renewing about Third Act is people adhere to some working principles we set up to say, we want to do this in a joyful way. We want to do this in a respectful way. We want to do this in a way that lifts up youth voices and backs them up rather than grabs the microphone and seizes the moment and has them as background information. But we want to do it in an impactful way too. And that really makes a difference. You know, some activist organizations, frankly, aren't very fun to be in. because people are so angry and they're so ego driven. And third act is something where you just take a step back and you say, look, we don't need to be at the front of the parade. We're here to back people up. We don't need to grab the headlines. We don't need to wrestle you to try to get the donors. What we want to do is be part of a community. And at the same time, it then makes it a much more enjoyable place to work, where you basically are trying to make sure that every voice is listened to, because there's a bunch of elders that have never done this stuff before, but they've got very good ideas. And if you just turned around and had some smart guy who's been doing this all his life like Bruce come in and tell you all the tactics and all the strategies and just fall in line, we wouldn't have the best tactics and strategies, and also they wouldn't feel like they've got a role to play.
Amen.
And they actually come up with great ideas. I mean, I don't know how to organize a retirement community or a nursing home, but they do. And as a result, we have people that, say, I can't march, I'm disabled, but at the same time, I can get on the phone or I can write some postcards, let's try to figure out how to do this. So and I just think that works very well.
And
So,
it's, look, I Bruce is right.
so Bruce, you talked about joy, the joy of this work. Is there a moment of, in your 3 years with third act, moment of joy or surprise or meaningful moment that sort of captures that idea? Any stories stick in your mind? I'm going to ask you, Bill, the same question.
Well, at Sierra Club and at third act, I like winning. And it's great to, act and then find that nothing happens. But when things happen, that really makes a difference and it makes you feel like it was all worthwhile. And, through Bill's insight and leadership, we the best kind of civil disobedience action you can have is the one you don't have to hold. And that is what happened that day. But I think there's just other ones that just fill my heart that at the same time, they're finding new meaning in their life and the reason why you need to carry on instead of just sitting and moaning the loss of your spouse, which is also critically important to do.
Amen. A community with 450 people, and I'd say more than half of them were at this talk that I was giving, and just incredibly eager to, I mean, look, it's great important parts of being human and you know that you don't really, it's just a word. But at a certain point, you realize that, you know, and everybody wants the the meaningful chance to do something about it, to dig in, and that for me is the excitement here, to just watch people come alive at their own abilities. We spend a lot of time. We, you know. With the same kind of intensity. And people do, and it's great. It's the by far the most fun organizing I've ever done.
So with 100,000 volunteers, it may be hard to answer this question, but I'm curious, who's the oldest volunteer?
You know, the who had, you know, we talk about baby boomers, but he was not a baby boomer. He, you know, he flew 20 combat missions over Germany in World War II. And um, and that's, I mean, that, to understand the course of history like that is very moving. I was thinking about that in the course of this last election, that Jimmy Carter, who had been born in, you know, Red Clay, Georgia in 1924, lived long enough to vote for a black woman for president of the United States. You know, uh, those kind of historical legacies are super powerful. We have lots of people who, you know, Akaya Windwood, who's the sort of lead volunteer or organizer, and become a great friend of all of ours. I mean, she was the, you know, as a young black girl, integrated her school in, you know, I mean, those kind of, Heather Booth, who's been on our board, you know, went south in Freedom Summer in 1964, the day after the, you know, Cheney and Schwerner and Goodman were murdered in the fields of Mississippi, and she just got on the bus and went down there anyway to keep doing that work. Um, those kind of legacies are really profound.
I'll say that as I'm organizing new groups and getting to meet the people that show up and say, yeah, I want to help set this up, a working group in this state, and take some leadership role. When you hear them tell their own life stories and their backgrounds, it's just astounding, the talent bank and diversity. And we usually ask them, what brought you to third act? And it's, every story's a new, unique one. But, you know, there can be, you know, everything from blue collar labor people that haven't had a college education all the way through PhDs and Nobel laureates. And they're all part of the scene, and it's what's beautiful about it, because they can all bring their talents together and respect what each of them can bring and do, rather than saying this is going to be largely meant for a certain type of
Amen.
people with a certain kind of background and educational
Amen.
achievement.
Right. One last question for you. And I actually give your story of Norman Lear reminded me. So maybe one of my favorite interviews I ever did was actually of Norman Lear and a 13-year-old friend of his. And the best part about my work as an interviewer is I didn't do anything. They started talking to each other and had a great time, and I had a great time listening to them. It was the easiest interview I ever did, and the best. And it made me, so you mentioned Norman Lear made me sort of reminded me of that sort of intergenerational friendship. So what's it like for you guys to work with people who are young enough to be your grandchildren?
I've been doing it my whole life. I love working with younger people, and we have a very small staff at Third Act, but about half of it's people over 60 and half of it's young people. And I love doing it. And I think I've actually observed how moved they've been, I think unexpectedly, by the experience of working with older people. Um, um, at one level, everyone's the same, and at another level, we're in profoundly different passages in life, but they're all deeply complementary, and it's really moving and 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 pleasurable to get to work across those boundaries of age, and to do it consciously, to not be scared of talking about it and thinking about it. We have different challenges that we work with. We have I spent my life working largely with young people, and it didn't occur to me that they were going to have strokes or die or whatever in the middle of the campaign that we were working on. And that happens routinely at Third Act. And we have to, know emotionally how to deal with that and respect it and whatever. But it makes it all the more beautiful to just watch people give what they've got right to the minute when they don't have anything.
I would just add that as I'm setting up these working groups around the country, which is one of the things I volunteer to do, each working group in each state is interested in having partnerships and being in a coalition and finding at least one youth organization that cares about climate and democracy that they want to partner with.
Amen.
And then lifting them up and inviting them to their meetings and finding out what their agenda is and how we can back them up on what their agenda is, instead of us going and saying, hey, we know how to do this and come show up at our demonstration.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true for low-income people of color communities that are in the front line of pollution and the ones most impacted by climate change. That finding those partners and listening to them and supporting them in their efforts is also something that the third actors are, not obligated to do, but actually are excited about doing, because they realize that this kind of intersectionality is the best way to build a movement. Because if you're trying to change everything, you've got to include everybody. You
Amen.
can't just do it with elders. You can't just do it with affluent white people with college educations. You've got to find the broadest possible movement. And that's with every generation and every income level and every education level, because we all face the same difficulties and challenges that are coming to our democracy and our climate.
Amen.
Thank you all. Kate, do you have any questions for Bill and Bruce?
I don't. That was really wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining
Guys,
us.
thank you both very much. Kate, Ken, this was really fun. And
yeah.
And Bruce, as always, man, so good to get to see you and talk with you, and see you all soon.
Okay, well,
All right.
stay well and
Thank
good
you.
with your mom.
Peace out. Bye.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.